Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere a little quieter than a desert full of yakshals, though I can't promise it's any less strange. You're stepping into the cool stone belly of a medieval scriptorium. It smells like candle wax, dry parchment, and that peculiar metallic temps of ink. The air is heavy, but not with dust, it's heavy with focus. Every figure here is bent over their desk like the pages in front of them are the only thing keeping the world from unraveling. And they might be right. You probably won't survive this, at least not without getting ink on your sleeves or a cramp in your spine. Because these people work in silence for hours, days, even years, all to create books that most of us would now flip through in 5 minutes before putting back on the shelf. But these pages are treasures, and the people making them, they're about to be your new favorite eccentrics. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe it, only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from anywhere with actual paper and ink nearby, drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know if there's a modern scribe out there right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the doorway. A single shaft of morning light falls through a narrow slit in the wall, catching on motes of dust that hang in the air like tiny, lazy fireflies. The room is long and narrow, lined with heavy wooden desks, each one littered with ink pots, quills, small knives, and little piles of cut parchment. Some scribes sit upright, steady as saints. Others hunch low, so close to the page their noses almost smudged the ink. A bell rings somewhere down the cloister, muffled but insistent. No one looks up. This is the rhythm of the scriptorium. Work, prayer, work, meal, work, prayer, work, bed, and repeat, if your back holds out. Your sandals make the faintest whisper on the stone floor, and still a few heads lift. Not to greet you, just to size up whether you're here for serious business or just another curiosity waster. You're waved to an empty desk, one whose surface is already smoothed by years of elbows and quill scratches. A single sheet of parchment waits, curling slightly at the edges. The parchment feels strange, thicker than paper, softer than leather, because it is leather. Sheep or calf, most likely. The faint scent of animal lingers, even after scraping and stretching. That smell, that's history's most underrated detail. You're literally writing on the skin of a creature that once grazed in a field somewhere, oblivious to the fact that it would eventually host a saint's words or a doodle of a sword-wielding rabbit. Historians still argue whether scriptoria were bustling production lines or serene, monkish retreats. Evidence suggests both existed, some attached to wealthy monasteries churning out volumes for profit, others quietly producing single works over decades. You can almost feel which one this is. The air is too tense for leisure, too exacting for mass market speed. A scribe to your left pauses, shakes his hand, and flexes his fingers before returning to the page. You peek. Perfect lines of Latin march across the parchment, every letter as uniform as if stamped. At the edges, faint ruling lines made with a lead plummet keep the text from wandering. These lines will later be scraped away, but for now, they're the silent rails guiding the train. You're handed a quill goose feather, white, trimmed to a sharp, split point. It's lighter than you expect, but alive with purpose. The tip gleams with a hint of ink. You hesitate. The page waits. This is the threshold. Cross it, and you're in their world where every stroke matters, where a blot can ruin a week's work, and where the margins, well, the margins sometimes tell a very different story. A faint cough echoes from the far end. A candle flickers, your quill hovers, and you begin. The goose quill in your hand feels more like a feather's ghost than a writing instrument, light, but holding an edge honed for precision. Beside you, the scribe with the ink-stained fingertips gestures at the small knives laid neatly on his desk. These aren't for defense against unruly monks. They're for coaxing your feather into a perfect extension of your will. He selects one from the row, its blade short, bright, and curved ever so slightly. With a single practiced slice, he pairs the quill's tip to a sharp, angled point. Then he holds it up to the light, checking for symmetry. The cut is followed by a tiny notch down the center of the slit. This allows the quill to hold just enough ink for smooth, even strokes. Too shallow, and it scratches. Too deep, and it dumps ink like a careless apprentice. A scrap of parchment rests nearby, covered in small, identical MS practice strokes. The sound of quill on skin is softer than you expect, a faint, dry whisper. The scribe shows you how to dip the quill knot, plunging it like a spoon in stew, but just enough to catch ink on the inner walls of the slit. Too much ink, and you'll blot. Too little, and you'll scrape. The ink itself sits in a tiny ceramic pot, covered with a cloth to keep out dust and the occasional insect. It's thick and black, smelling faintly metallic. Made from iron gall. It's a mixture of tannin from oak galls, iron salts, and gum arabic. It'll bite into the parchment fibers, darkening over days, resisting fade for centuries. You can almost hear the parchment sighing in resignation. It knows, this ink will outlive kingdoms. Historians still argue whether scribes always prepared their own tools, or whether large scriptoria had dedicated supply makers. Surviving records suggest both. Some monks prided themselves on crafting perfect quills and mixing the blackest ink, while others relied on specialists, who delivered the goods like medieval office supply vendors. The scribe points to the feather's shaft, now trimmed so the barbs don't brush the page. Goose feathers were common, but for finer work like illuminations, swans or even crow quills were prized for their flexibility. You hear a quiet rumor from a neighboring desk. A scribe in another monastery swore by pelican quills, claiming the birds lent pious strength to the words. Whether he truly believed that or just liked pelicans is lost to time. You try your first stroke. The quill glides, then catches. You look down. A thin black line trails off into a blot at the end, like a snake that forgot where it was going. Your desk neighbor raises an eyebrow. Without a word, he hands you a small pumice stone and motions for you to gently sand the nib back into obedience. This is the reality here. The tools aren't static. A quill tip dulls fast. You trim and retrim it dozens of times a day. A knife is always at hand, not just for parchment corrections but for keeping your writing point alive. The scriptorium floor is scattered with tiny curls of discarded feather, each a casualty in the war for neat handwriting. Quirky detail. Some scribes personalized their knives with carvings or inscriptions, saints, prayers, even little curses against anyone who dared borrow them. A few blades found in archaeological digs bear notches from absent-minded whittling during long nights. The tools carried personality, just like their owners. You watch as the master scribe demonstrates a quick sequence: slice, scrape, test on scrap, dip, write, over and over. The rhythm is hypnotic. You begin to see why this work, for all its tedium, can also be a meditation. Every movement has purpose. Every pause has weight. And when the quill finally makes that perfect, unbroken line across the page, it's not just ink meeting parchment. It's you, the bird, the craftsman who shaped the nib, the one who mixed the ink, and every hand that prepared the parchment before it reached your desk, all collaborating for one silent, steady moment. Somewhere down the line, maybe centuries from now, someone will run their fingers over that stroke. And if you did your work well, it will still be sharp, still be dark, still whispering the same word you're writing now. The quill rests on the desk, its point honed and tested. And now your eyes wander toward the back of the room where the colors live. No one here just writes in black. Even the most solemn manuscripts demand a splash of life in the margins. Letters glowing in gold, vines twisting between columns of text, saints haloed in deep blues and reds. All of that begins with the pigment table. It's less a table and more a crowded altar to powdered minerals, strange liquids, and the occasional insect corpse. Earthen bowls line the surface, each filled with something that looks harmless enough until you learn what it's made from. That glowing ultramarine, ground lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, worth more than gold. That vivid red cinnabar, beautiful but laced with mercury. That warm yellow, saffron threads, crushed and steeped until they bleed color into water or egg yolk. A young scribe works the pestle against a mortar, grinding malachite into a green so bright it almost hums. The sound is steady, rhythmic, meditative. The motion has been done so many times, the stone's surface feels like silk under your fingertips. You sit beside a jar of black pigment, different from your writing ink. This one is pure carbon black, scraped from soot and mixed with gum arabic. It's 4 outlines, for the clean definition that keeps colors sharp. The recipe is simple. The patience to apply it is not. Historians still argue whether scribes always made their own paints, or if larger scriptoria kept a designated illuminator who specialized in pigment craft. Some records suggest a collaborative process. The scribe writes, the illuminator colors, and the master corrects both. Other sources hint that in smaller monasteries, one poor soul did it all. From grinding the pigments to scraping the mistakes, to painting that last stubborn vine in the margin. You lean in to watch the preparation of gold leaf. The sheet is so thin it trembles when someone exhales nearby. It's laid onto a cushion, cut with a knife that's sharp enough to make you nervous, and then lifted onto a sticky base painted onto the page. When pressed flat, it catches the light like a frozen sunbeam. And once it's there, it stays unless some centuries later reader decides to scrape it off for pocket money. Quirky detail. Not all pigments were imported treasures. Some were downright improvised. For pinks, scribes might boil down Brazelwood chips and lye. For a murky purple, they'd soak cloth in fermented urine to extract the dye. There's even one dubious 14th century note about mixing pigment with pigeon droppings for vibrance. Though whether that was a genuine tip or a scribe's joke at an apprentice's expense is still debated. The smell here is strange, but strangely pleasant, earthy from the minerals. Warm from the egg yolk binders, faintly sweet from honey used in certain mixes. You think about modern paints in neat tubes, and realize nothing about these colors was convenient. Every hue was earned, mined, bought, crushed, sifted, strained, tested. A boy walks by carrying a shell filled with shimmering blue paint. He sets it down beside a half-finished capital letter A that already sprawls like an ornate doorway. The letter's curves are outlined in carbon black. Its interior will be lapis, gilded at the edges, dotted with tiny white stars made from powdered chalk. It's a single letter, but it will take hours, maybe days. You pick up a brush, not the wide, flat kind you know, but a delicate tuft of animal hair bound to a stick. The bristles are squirrel, soft as breath. You try a stroke on scrap parchment. The pigment lays down smoothly, but the brush has a mind of its own. You think you're in control until you see the uneven edge. The illuminator doesn't scold. He just chuckles, takes the brush back, and shows you again. The movement is slow, even, like pouring cream into still water. You watch him work for a while, forgetting to blink, the page beneath his hand becoming a garden of color. The ink might hold the meaning, but this is what will make someone turn the page again, centuries from now. You steady your quill over the ruled parchment, and the room narrows to a rectangle of cream under your hand. The ruling lines drawn earlier, with a lead plummet and a taut thread, are faint rails that keep the text marching in disciplined columns. You inhale, and the scribe beside you inhales too. Not a coincidence. He's taught his breath to set the pace. Draw in, make 3 neat minims. Exhale, sweep a curve, pause, lift, dip, continue. It's calligraphy, conducted by lungs. Your smartwatch would record 0 steps and 1,000 tiny victories. A clean page isn't a blank canvas here, it's a contract. In the upper margin, a rubricator has already brushed a red guide word, just a cue. A quiet trumpet telling you what section begins. Red for headings, black for body, gold for glory. You brace the quill at a 40-ish degree angle. Nothing medieval is truly right-angled except the benches, and you start to copy from the exemplar propped on a lectern, word for word, stroke for stroke, like a swimmer pacing the tiles at the bottom of the pool. The script chosen for today is Gothic texture and arrow, upright, and so regular it looks woven. Earlier centuries favored rounder Caroline minuscule. Later, hands sharpened and stacked the strokes to pack more text onto costly skin. That's the mainstream fact humming under your wrist. Script changes save space and shape reading. The letters here are tall with tight shoulders. Minims stand like fence pickets. You breathe shallow for the eyes, longer for the long S that curves below the line. Diagonals demand confidence. Your quill wants to skate. Your fingers convince it to dance. You get into rhythm. Dots punctus fall like measured rain. Abbreviations sprout over words, tiny hooks, and lines that save room and ink. A macron marks an omitted M or N. A 9-shaped sign stands in for us. Efficient, yes, but also an initiation rite. If you can't read the signs, the page keeps its secrets. Across the column, a blue Lombard capital waits for the illuminator. You leave a lacuna, a clean square of promise. Your desk neighbor mutters, not a prayer exactly, more like a pact with his tendons. He's copying from a 2-column exemplar, his eyes flicking left and right, with metronomic discipline. No finger dragging on the model, no oily smudges allowed. When his gaze returns to his own page, he taps the knife point once on the board. TCH, a habit that means found my place. You borrow the tick a few lines later. It feels like learning the secret knock to a very quiet club. The air is warm with beeswax and the faint temps of iron gall. Your quill sings a soft dry square on good parchment and a reluctant TSK where the grain is tight. A hair in the skin threatens to swerve your stroke. You take up the penknife, tip the blade, and lift the hair like plucking a splinter from time. The cut is so light the page doesn't bleed. Parchment forgives with thickness that paper can't. Quirky tidbit wanders over from 2 desks down. A tired scribe has added a microscopic doodle of his own feet beneath the last line of yesterday's choir. Toes pointing at the colophon where he wrote, "My hand is weary. Give me drink." Somewhere else in Europe, another wrote a curse against book thieves, so spicy the margins still smolder. If anyone steals this book, may he be cooked in a pan. You smile into your sleeve and keep your letters straight. Breath becomes architecture. You find you can copy a whole half line on one slow exhale. The descender of the P dips exactly as your ribs relax. The tail of the G lifts as your lungs refill. The master once told the room that breath is the difference between drawn letters and written words. You didn't understand then. Now, your quill finishes a word as naturally as your mouth would. The body remembers shapes, even the brain can't name. At the break, you test your work by tilting the page toward the light. Good textura looks like a woven cloth, consistent rhythm. Verticals aligned, white pathways, the rivy running between letters like irrigation channels. If the rivy meander, your eye tangled. If they march, you're in step. You spot one spot where a minim leans a degree too far right. It bothers you the way an itchy tag does under your collar. You leave it. A page without one small imperfection is either a miracle or a forgery. Scolia creep in the edges. The exemplar held a faint marginal hand, noting hic facat, missing here, where a prior scribe skipped a psalm line. Do you copy the omission or restore the sense from memory? Historians still argue whether medieval scribes copied strictly letter for letter or allowed themselves to correct by sense. Especially in well-known texts, your master prefers fidelity. Copy the model as seen, but flag the wound. You add a tiny nota seen, a pointing hand with a cuff, thumb tucked in so future readers know you saw the gap, and let it speak. The bell in the cloister pulses the hour. No one bolts upright. The room is a garden of patient habits. A novice trims his quill with too much enthusiasm, decapitates the nib, and blushes crimson. You pass him your spare. He writes you an earnest thank you in an unshoe so huge it looks like a headline. Joke one lands silently. Your eyebrow says nice, your pen says smaller. You reach the bottom of the column and justify the line the medieval way, not with a software button but with craft. You tweak the spacing between words. You allow a flourish of a final stroke to fill the gap. You deploy a sanctioned abbreviation near the end to bring the right margin into that pleasing vertical plumb. When it locks in, the whole page breathes out with you. It's city planning in ink. A speck of ash lands on your line. The candle guttered, a spark leaped. You could brush, smudge, curse. Instead, you turn to the scribe's first tool, the knife, and scrape gently, lifting the blemish and a whisper of surface. The page shows a faint blush, parchment's version of a scar that will heal beneath fresh ink. You redraw the lost stroke. No one will know, except the person centuries from now who angles the page to the light and smiles at your neat humility. The master comes by, a footfall, a shadow, a nod. He turns your quire to check the stitching holes at the fold neat even, ready for sewing into the gathering. He tests a letter with his fingernail. Iron gall has already bitten, so the gloss won't smear under the binder's press. He murmurs a rare praise. Your breath shows. You feel absurdly tall for someone sitting. The jokes keep themselves small here. A fly decides your margin note is a runway. You hold your breath like a hunter and shoo it with the tail of a long S. A cramp twists your fingers, and you flex them into a claw that could rent space in a bestiary. Somewhere, a stomach growls like a minor demon. Everyone pretends not to notice. Holiness is a straight line. Humor is a flourish at the end. By late afternoon, the room cools. You finish the column, leave room for the initial, and add your quire signature at the bottom. Write a small letter and number that will help the binder stack gatherings in order. You glance once more at the exemplar, at the faded hand across from yours. You are tethered to a stranger by inkla. The words pass through you, but the breath is yours. You sand the last period with a dusting of pumice, blow gently, not too hard. Never spit hand. Set the sheet aside beneath a board to dry flat. The page looks quiet, but it hums with the invisible choreography of chest and hand, knife and feather, eye and margin. You exhale. Across the room, as if cued, someone else does too. You don't mean to make the mistake. No one ever does. It begins as a tremor in your fourth finger, a hair in the parchment grain. The bell tolling mid-stroke when your mind leaps ahead of your hand. The quill, so obedient an hour ago, suddenly decides it would like to be a brush. A dot swells, a curve sags, and there it is, a blot small, inky, undeniably alive, sunbathing in the middle of a holy sentence like a smug beetle. First rule: don't panic. Panic is how blots grow legs. You freeze your breath, lift the pennifius, The same little blade that trims your nib and set its edge to the surface. Scraping a mistake is surgery, not violence. You tilt the blade almost flat, coaxing the ink film away with strokes so light they're practically apologies. A translucent curl rizzes parchment snow. With each whisper of the knife, the letter grows paler, until what remains is not a word but the memory of one. You dust the wound with powdered pumice, rub a touch of gum to reseal the fibers, and wait. If you've been gentle, the page will take ink again. If you've hurried, it will scab and shine and tell on you for centuries. Across the bench, a grown-up neighbor has performed the classic act of medieval slapstick. His sleeve cuff kissed a wet descender. Now his beautiful long S trails a comet's tail. He mutters something that is technically a prayer but sounds remarkably like a threat. Quirky tidbit. More than one manuscript preserves a scribe's margin whisper at such moments. Cursed be the wicked fly, or let whoever brought the cat in be excommunicated. Somewhere, paw prints wander through a psalm like a furry editorial. You hand him a small square of stale bread. The crumb lifts grease and soot without scratching. Medieval eraser, please meet modern crumb snacker instincts. There are errors you can carve away, and errors you must confess. A skipped word. You insert a caret, a tiny V-shaped stitch in the line, and write the missing word above in a neat superscript. A skipped line. The dreaded haplography demands a marginal rescue. Note a sign in the shape of a pointing hand, the manicula's cuff rough deliciously extra. Plus, a cue letter that tells the reader where to rejoin the river of sense. Wrote something twice. Titography. You plant expunction dots beneath the intruder, a row of tiny punctures that say please read me with invisibility. Medieval redaction is polite but firm. Mainstream fact under all this ink triage. Parchment is forgiving in ways paper is not. Made from animal skin, it has depth. You can lift a letter without tearing the page's soul, then write anew over the same spot. That's why entire books could be reborn as palimpsests, older texts lightly scraped and overwritten when materials ran short or priorities changed. Under ultraviolet light, scholars today read lost sermons and plays ghosting beneath later prayers. Historians still argue whether palimpsesting was mostly economic necessity, routine recycling in lean times, or sometimes an act of ideological cleansing when a text fell out of favor. Your knife doesn't care. It only knows thickness, grain, and patience. Some mistakes are architectural. You glance up at the exemplar, blink once too long, and your eye returns to the wrong line. The result is a seamless leap over a sentence that your breath had sworn it would honor. You catch it 3 words later, because the grammar hiccups. Latin trips your ear like a stone in a sandal. You raise your hand. The master pads over, reads, hums through his nose. He taps the margin, mark it, restore below. You do not a cover-up, but a visible repair, the medieval equivalent of a version control commit message. The page learns, and so do you. Then there are the glamorous catastrophes, the ones that involve geometry. Your ruling lines, those pale rails obediently scratched with a lead plummet, have bowed just enough that the right margin wanders. You notice too late that your text is about to collide with the vacancy reserved for a gilded initial. Options: squeeze, abbreviate, pray, or do the unthinkable, cut the whole column out and stitch in a replacement. Bookbinding whisper. You can inlay a new patch of matching parchment and lace it with thread, so discreet that only a librarian with a magnifier and a free afternoon will ever notice. It's page surgery with bedside manners. Not all corrections are textual. Smudged color. The illuminator lays a veil of egg-white glaze to lock down a crumbly verdigris before it eats the page. Flaking gold leaf. He breathes warm moisture through a cloth to wake the bowl glue beneath, and burnishes with a dog's tooth until the sun returns. A fallen speck of lapis in the gutter. It will sparkle there like an accidental star, and some future curator will smile as if you meant it all along. Humor sneaks in as pressure valve. A novice, told to rubricate the insipid, paints the opening words red like a murder scene. Another weary in winter, adds at a choir's end, cold. The candle stinks. My hand is numb. Amen. Joke 1. You scribble a microscopic woolen cap on the little manicula pointing at that complaint. Joke 2. You write explicit fragora. Here ends the cold. The first time the sun finds your desk after a week of clouds. Joke 3. When a fly lands in your ink and exits more decisive than it entered. You declare it promoted to rubricator and set it carefully outside. But the scriptorium also builds systems to avoid needing the knife at all. Before you copy a tricky passage, you collate whisper-eating the exemplar against another witness, if the library owns one, aligning their variants. The master keeps a quire of common abbreviations pinned above his desk, so your space saving won't mutate into cryptography. A small tray of fine sand sits near your elbow to dust. Wet lines pounce for parchment, not to be confused with pouncing chalk used to key a scraped spot for fresh ink. Vocabulary here is a hedge around disaster, proof that prevention is cheaper than cure. You remember the breath lessons from yesterday the way a line finishes on an exhale and realize they help with mistakes too. Slow breath makes calm hands. Calm hands see the error while it's still a rumor. A quill dried too long scratches. A fresh dip floods. You learn a middle path your muscles can walk without thinking. The page is listening. It can tell if you're hurrying to catch the bell or letting the bell wait for you. There's a reason some margins host tiny calendars, tally marks of days, weather notes, even a doodled moon. Time itself is a tool here. You tune it like a string. You do slip once more, lured by the rhythm of Gothic textura, into a line of minims, so identical they become optical illusions. Is that Mni or Niu, or the riverbeds between them? You add a punctus elevatus, that elegant medieval semicolon where the sense needs a breath, then a tiny guide mark above the ambiguous cluster. Somewhere, a future reader will thank you for choosing mercy over pride. By evening's last candle, your page bears its small, honest history. 1 lifted blot, 2 caret insertions, a marginal read here, a hairline scrape no thicker than a whisper, and the quiet sheen of work done without drama. The master passes a palm over the surface, not touching, just feeling the page's weather. He nods. Errors make good teachers, he says, concealed ones make bad books. You stack your quire beneath a board to rest flat. The knife returns to its place. The quill's tip is kissed against the pumice, and you let your hand unfurl from its monk's claw. You did not survive the day unscathed. You did something better. You made the scars beautiful. You've learned to trim quills without nicking your fingers. You've ground pigments into velvet dust. You've erased blots like a surgeon erasing regret. And now, for the first time, you catch something blooming on the page that isn't part of the official text. At first, you think it's a flourish, a slightly ambitious descender, curling too far into the gutter. But when you tilt your head, the curl resolves into a tail. A long, skinny tail attached to what is very obviously a rabbit, holding a spear. You glance toward the scribe responsible, but he's bent low over his work, his shoulders shaking ever so slightly. This is your first close encounter with the true extracurricular life of the manuscript, marginalia. The term sounds polite, almost bureaucratic, but what you're seeing here is anything but. A monk with steady hands and a sense of humor has decided that alongside this saint's sermon there shall live a dueling pair of snails, a fish with human legs, and a nun playing a harp carved into a pumpkin. And he's doing it in the same careful, deliberate hand he uses for sacred words. Mainstream fact. Marginal doodles show up across centuries of manuscripts, decorative borders that start sensible and end surreal. Some illuminate letters with curling vines and beasts. Others stage entire miniature dramas just inches from holy text. Historians still argue whether these drawings were sanctioned whimsy, private jokes, or even coded commentary meant for a knowing audience. There's evidence of all three. You lean closer to one page where a line of solemn black-letter Latin is interrupted by a man chasing a goose. No caption, no obvious biblical reference. The goose's beak is open, mid-honk, and you can almost hear it over the silent room. The pigment is fresh enough that the blue of the man's tunic still catches the light. Quirky tidbit. Scholars have found doodles that seem to be self-portraits of the scribes, themselves tiny robed figures bent over desks, looking as exhausted as you feel after a long day. Others hide meta moments, a monk in the margin poking the main text with a stick, or a creature curled up and sleeping directly beside the words hic requiescat, here rests. Your master, catching your gaze, nods toward the rabbit knight. Leave it, he murmurs, it offends no one. Then he adds, with the flicker of a grin, and it keeps the saints company. You try your own hand at something small, a leaf curling into the shape of a cat's ear in the lower corner. You tell yourself it's decorative, but the curl becomes a whole cat, tail wrapped around its paws. You ink its eyes last, 2 dots of personality. It looks smug, like it knows you just crossed a quiet line. Later, as you stretch your legs, you see an apprentice sketching in the sanded margin of a practice sheet. It's a procession of frogs, each carrying a tiny banner. You watch him for a moment before he erases them. Practice parchment is precious. The frogs vanish, leaving only the faintest ghost of whimsy. Marginalia can be playful, but it can also be biting. In some books, bishops appear with donkey ears. In others, judgmental faces leer at certain passages, as if disagreeing with the text itself. One famous example shows a scribe writing while a cat relieves itself nearby. Whether it's satire, personal diary, or just boredom, no one can say for sure. Historians still debate how much of this was deliberate subversion versus spontaneous amusement. Back at your desk, you find yourself glancing at the empty spaces differently. The gutters and borders aren't just blank, they're potential stages. Even the way vines curl around an initial feels like an invitation. And in a place where every letter is measured, maybe it's the unmeasured moments in the margins that make the work human. As evening comes, candlelight catches on a patch of gold leaf in one of the doodles, a tiny halo over a chicken's head. The chicken is reading a book. You almost laugh, but you swallow it, letting the sound sit quietly in your chest. You understand, now, that some secrets aren't kept to be hidden. They're kept so the right reader will find them. It starts innocently enough, a single meow echoing down the cloister. The kind of sound that makes everyone glance up without thinking, like some secret password only half remembered. Then soft paws on stone. And before you can say don't you dare, a tabby cat pads straight into the scriptorium, as though she's the abbot. She is not welcome. Not officially, anyway. Her tail brushes a desk leg, her nose twitches toward the nearest open ink pot, and she leaps light as dust onto a scribe's bench. There's a collective, silent wince as her paws land squarely on a drying page. She leaves perfect black prints across the parchment and onto the margin, as if signing her contribution to the holy text. The scribe sighs, mutters a prayer that might be a curse, and sets the page aside for scraping. Quirky tidbit. One surviving 15th century manuscript in Dubrovnik still bears cat paw prints alongside a note from the scribe. Cursed be the pestilent cat that urinated on this book during the night. Turns out feline mischief is a universal constant. And it's not just cats. This scriptorium has its other distractions. The steady shuffle of feet as someone crosses to the pigment table. The distant clink of kitchen pots. The occasional muffled laugh from novices copying Bodhi Latin verse they swear is for practice. In some monasteries, coffee had not yet arrived in Europe, but spiced wine or warm ale sometimes found its way to a weary scribe's desk. Here, it's more often a thin broth or warm milk, carried in discreetly. Rules say no eating in the workroom. Rules bend when it's cold. Historians still argue how strictly monastic silence was enforced in every scriptorium. Some evidence points to whispered conversations being tolerated, even encouraged for collaboration. Others describe strict chapter of false punishments for any unnecessary noise. You suspect this room lives somewhere in between, quiet enough for concentration, loose enough that a joke can pass between benches without scandal. At your own desk, you're midway through a clean column when a novice sneezes so violently he leaves a constellation of droplets on the upper margin. He freezes, eyes wide. The master appears, inspects the damage, and simply slides the sheet into the to-be-scraped pile. No words, just the faintest shake of his head. You think about how every book here, for all its beauty, hides small disasters like secret chapters. You also start to notice the little survival rituals. How scribes flex their fingers after each paragraph. How some keep a scrap of wool to wrap around their quill hand in winter. How one old scribe occasionally closes his eyes for 5 full breaths before continuing, his lips moving silently as though reciting something to himself. This isn't laziness, it's preservation. Hands, eyes, and posture are as much tools as the quill. By late afternoon, the cat has made 3 more rounds of the room, stolen a scrap of leather, and curled up in the patch of sunlight on the pigment table. The illuminator has given up trying to move her. You think she might actually be guarding the gold leaf. Or maybe she just likes the view. Your own page ends with a clean stretch of margin, and without meaning to. Your quill idles there, sketching a paw print so small it's almost invisible. You let it stay. Maybe, in a few hundred years, someone will wonder if it was real. By now, you've learned to keep your peripheral vision sharp. It's not just the cat or the sudden sneeze you're guarding against, it's the unexpected arrival of visitors. And today, the door creaks open to admit a figure in fine wool, trimmed with fur, despite the mild weather. Not a monk, not a novice, a patron. You can spot them instantly. Their hands are too clean, their belt too ornate, and their eyes sweep the room with a mix of curiosity and ownership. This is the person funding a manuscript in progress, and their presence changes the air, if only slightly. Conversations still, quills lift. And the master comes forward with the sort of bow that is half respect, half performance. The patron's book will likely bear their coat of arms on the first folio, maybe their portrait woven into a biblical scene. Mainstream fact, wealthy nobles, clergy, or even guilds often commissioned manuscripts to display piety, status, or both. These were not cheap gifts between parchment, pigments, labor, and gilding. A lavish book could cost as much as a small house. Historians still argue how much of the patron's taste directly shaped the book's artistry, versus how much was left to the scriptorium's standard styles. The visitor pauses beside your desk. You keep your eyes on your work but sense their gaze lingering on your half-finished page. They lean slightly closer, perhaps to admire the evenness of your textura, or perhaps to judge whether the gold leaf could be shinier. They don't speak etiquette, dictates that comments pass through the master, but they do tap a finger once on the desk, almost imperceptibly, before moving on. You wonder if it's approval or a mental note for later. Quirky tidbit: some patrons were notorious for micromanaging their commissions. sending detailed instructions on everything from margin width to the exact shade of blue in the Virgin's robe. Others hardly visited at all, leaving surprises for the final delivery, sometimes awkward correction. The patron stops at the pigment table, chatting softly with the illuminator. You catch a glimpse of a swatch deep crimson, almost glowing. Could be cochineal, imported at great cost. Could be kermes, made from Mediterranean scale insects. Each speck of dye a tiny life crushed for beauty. Either way, it says money. When they finally depart, the air loosens again. The master claps his hands once, as if to shake off the tension. Back to it, he says, and the steady chorus of quills resumes. You dip your pen, steady your breathing, and let the visitor fade from your mind. After all, the book will outlive both of you, and perhaps centuries from now, someone will run a finger along your careful lines, never knowing the fur-cuffed gaze that once watched them form. The bell tolls for vespers, but your bench remains occupied. You've been granted permission to work through the prayer hour, a sign of trust. Though it also means you'll be copying under the weight of the monastic timetable instead of resting. The scriptorium's routine is a world unto itself. At dawn, lauds; at mid-morning, terce; at noon, sext; mid-afternoon, none; evening, vespers; and at night, compline. Each toll is a seam in the day's fabric, and between them, your work must fit like careful stitching. The hours feel long, but the years pass quickly. Mainstream fact: medieval scribes often worked to these canonical hours, their days divided between prayer, meals, and copying. Some scriptoria, especially in colder climates, reduced winter working hours to preserve health and candle wax. But tonight is different. You're still here under flickering candles while the rest of the monastery chants. The quiet is thick, broken only by the scratch of your quill and the occasional pop of cooling wax. You feel the weight of the lamp oil in its glass. Each minute a tiny burn of resources. Quirky tidbit: in some monasteries, scribes used night candles with nails inserted at set intervals. As the wax melted and the nail dropped, it would hit the brass candle holder with a clang, and alarm that the hour had passed. In theory, it kept you from working too long. In practice, it often startled scribes into blotting their lines. Historians still argue whether this kind of nocturnal work was standard or exceptional. Some see it as evidence of tight deadlines for commissions, others as the habit of particularly devoted or particularly stubborn scribes. You suspect the truth lies somewhere between duty and ambition. The quiet hours give a strange clarity, fewer interruptions, more space for the mind to stretch across the page. Your hand moves steadily, though you're aware of the chill settling into your fingers. The only movement beyond your desk is the slow drip of wax, and the occasional flutter of the candle flame when the wind snakes through unseen cracks. Somewhere deep in the building, a door creaks open, then shuts. The sound echoes like a punctuation mark in an otherwise unbroken sentence. When the choir returns, there's a faint scent of incense in their robes that drifts into the scriptorium. You keep writing, your letters neat and even, the lines guided by the faint scoring you made hours earlier. The master passes behind you, resting his palm briefly on your shoulder, a gesture that says both enough for now and well done. You set down the quill, blow gently across the ink, and let the stillness hold you before the next bell calls you elsewhere. Some mornings, the scriptorium hums like a hive, orderly, methodical, every scribe bent over their page like a worker bee at a honeycomb. Other mornings, like today, it feels more like a relay race, where the baton is a half-finished choir and the finish line is a distant binding table. You're deep into your column when the master lays a fresh stack of folios beside you. From Brother Alaric, he says simply, and moves on. You glance at the top sheet. His hand is neat, but different enough from yours that the join will be obvious. The challenge now is harmony, matching his line height, his ink tone, even the pressure of his strokes, so the reader never sees the seam. Mainstream fact: many large manuscripts were collaborative efforts, with several scribes working simultaneously to meet a deadline. Sometimes each scribe took a whole section. Sometimes they alternated folios. Sometimes one copied the text while another specialized in rubrics and decorated initials. Historians still argue whether division of labor was primarily a matter of efficiency or of ensuring the most skilled hand worked on the most visible parts. The quirk today: Alaric has left you a tiny surprise. At the bottom margin, a half-inch sketch of a mouse carrying a scroll. Not quite hiding, not quite obvious. You smirk and slide the page into place, letting the little traveler continue his journey into your section. Coordination is more than matching handwriting. It's also pacing. The illuminator across the room works from your finished folios, adding golden color. If you're too slow, they wait idle. Too fast, and you risk errors. The binding bench, meanwhile, needs complete gatherings in correct order. It's like assembling a moving puzzle, each piece delicate and expensive. You've learned the scriptorium has unspoken signals. A folio turned face down means needs correction. A quill laid across the top edge means awaiting rubrication. Two sheets stacked slightly askew signal that a new quire is ready for sewing. It's quiet choreography, each motion a whisper of progress. The room's rhythm is occasionally interrupted by outside demands, a messenger arriving with a parchment delivery, a bell calling someone to the gatehouse, even the local weather. Quirky tidbit: damp days could delay work, as moisture in the air made ink feather unpredictably on parchment. On such days, scribes might shift to sharpening quills or preparing pigments instead. You finish Alaric's folios and pass them to the rubricator, who will add the red headings. The mouse with the scroll stays, because you can't bring yourself to scrape it away. After all, in a book meant to last centuries, maybe one more secret in the margins is exactly what it needs. The days grow shorter, and with them, the candles seem to burn faster. There's a draft tonight that curls around your ankles and makes the flame shiver against the wall, as if the shadows themselves are leaning closer to read over your shoulder. You keep your grip steady, though, because you're working on a particularly elaborate capital one wrong move, and you'll be scraping for an hour. This letter isn't just a letter. It's an entire stage. The shape of the queue frames a knight on horseback, his lance crossing into the loop, his shield painted in alternating bands of blue and gold. The illuminator leans over occasionally, adding thin veins of white to the horse's mane. So fine, you almost expect to feel the hair when you touch the page. Mainstream fact: historiated initials letters containing figures or scenes were a hallmark of medieval manuscript art, often marking the start of a new section. They served as visual anchors for readers in an age before page numbers or tables of contents. Historians still argue whether these images were primarily decorative or intended as mnemonic devices to aid memorization. The quirky twist tonight comes from the illuminator's humor. In the corner of the queue loop, barely visible, he's added a rabbit peeking out from behind the knight's shield. You know exactly which rabbit it is. It's the same little armored creature that's been dueling snails in the margins for weeks. Somehow, this page's solemn theme just became part of an ongoing inside joke. There's a satisfying teamwork in moments like this. You steady the text, he weaves in the image, and together the page feels alive. It's not about speed now, it's about harmony. Every curve of the letter must balance with the illustration. Every stroke of ink measured so the pigment won't bleed. Still, the draft creeps under your robe, and you're half tempted to tuck your feet into the hem like a child under a blanket. Quirky tidbit: Some scribes did just that, writing with their knees drawn up to conserve warmth. Parchment balanced on a board across their lap. It wasn't elegant, but it kept the ink from freezing in the bottle. When the letter is done, you lean back and let the candlelight catch the gold leaf. For a moment, the night seems to ride through a beam of sunlight. You set the quill aside and rest your cramped fingers, feeling the quiet satisfaction of a page that's as close to perfect as this room allows. Some days in the scriptorium feel timeless, every quill stroke and breath in rhythm like a heartbeat you've always known. But then there are the days when the work changes shape entirely. Today, you're not copying a sacred text or a patron's family genealogy. You're making a bestie. The shift is immediate. The lines are the same steady textura, but the words describe creatures both familiar and absurd. Lions that sleep with their eyes open to watch for danger. Basilisks whose breath withers plants. Beavers that, when hunted, supposedly bite off their own medicinal glands and toss them to the pursuer before scampering away. Mainstream fact: bestiaries were wildly popular in medieval Europe, blending natural history, moral allegory, and outright myth. They were teaching tools as much as entertainment, though the facts often came from ancient sources repeated uncritically. Historians still argue whether scribes and artists actually believed in these more fantastical beasts, or if they saw them as moral symbols first and foremost. You dip your quill again, amused at the idea of explaining to someone centuries from now why a book of animals has more dragons than dogs. The illuminator, working nearby, is clearly in his element. His brushstrokes turn a leopard into a riot of gold spots that seem ready to pounce right off the page. In the margin, he's added a fox with a knowing smirk, lying dead beside a pile of grapes, as the text instructs, luring unsuspecting birds close enough to grab. Quirky tidbit: some bestiary entries were so elaborate that they took more space than biblical miracles in the same manuscript. You've seen pages where the unicorn's capture by a maiden spans a whole folio, complete with tiny hunters hiding behind trees that are, themselves, taller than castles. Working on a bestiary feels lighter, though the precision is the same. The mistakes you fear aren't doctrinal, they're anatomical. Does the manticore's tail look enough like a scorpion's? Is the whale big enough to be mistaken for an island? You pause to sharpen your quill, imagining a reader centuries from now taking these pages as field guides and wondering why they never spot a phoenix in their local woods. When the day's work is done, you stack the folios carefully. The pages smell faintly of vermilion and oak gall ink, a mix as strange and alluring as the creatures they hold. You leave the room knowing tomorrow's work will return to scripture, but, for tonight, the beasts roam free in your head. You watch the last sheet cool beneath its board, the gold leaf finally asleep and the ink married to the skin. The binder summons you with a crook of his finger. This is where pages stop being a flock and become a book. He lays out the gathering squires, stitched along the fold with linen thread, signatures winking at the bottom corners like tiny mile markers. Wooden boards beach, smooth and pale, wait on the bench. He saws shallow channels at the inner edges to seat the sewing cords. Then he laces those cords through the boards and pounds the ends flat, so the whole thing holds like a well-tied boot. A thin leather spine lining, a smear of paste made from flour and water, yesterday's porridge reborn as architecture. You touch the boards, cold, sturdy, honest. The book feels heavier already, as if knowledge has physical gravity. The cover leather is warmed by hand-calf-dyed brown, faintly sweet with the smell of the tannery. He draws it tight, tucks the corners like a tailor, and sets metal bosses and corner pieces that will let the book lie on tables without scuffing its skin. Two clasps bite across the foredge. They're not decoration so much as climate control, keeping parchment under pressure. so it won't breathe damp air and grow wavy as a winter river. Mainstream fact: medieval codices were often bound with wooden boards, leather coverings, and metal fittings. Clasps were standard, precisely to hold back the parchment's habit of swelling with humidity. You fasten one and feel the tiny resistance of pages wanting to move and choosing discipline instead. Satisfying, like closing a very polite jaw. The binder burns a faint title into the spine with a hot tool. The letters sink and darken, more bruise than brand. He slides the finished volume into a chemise reperlong, soft skirt of cloth meant to protect the leather from travel. Greiman straps it shut with a thong. There's a small book chain ring at the top board's edge, just in case its final home is a lectern where volumes are kept chained for public reading. He sets the book in a wooden chest beside its brothers. For the first time in weeks, your hands are empty. Travel begins before the road. A provenance note on the first leaf. The patron's name and prayer, a scribe's colophon, whispering a date. The master slips a folded letter into the chest listing contents, destinations, and a warning about damp. A lump of beeswax curls into one corner. Emergency candle, emergency seal, emergency everything. Someone adds sprigs of dried rosemary to keep moths honest. You add nothing except your breath, which fogs in the cold air as the lid shuts. The chest is hoisted onto a mule with a patience older than Latin. You go too, cloak folded quilt case at your belt out of habit, as if you might be asked to correct the sky en route. Dawn throws its thin silver over the road and you rock into it. The straps creaking, the mule unconcerned with your lofty thoughts about literature because there is a hedge with very interesting leaves. The road does not care that you carry a saint's words and 3 illuminated rabbits. It is mud, then frozen ruts, then a stone bridge slick enough to inspire immediate piety. Your feet learn the geometry of potholes. Your shoulders learn the weight of a chest that can't be dropped. You pass a wagon stuck to its axles like a pastry glued to a tray. 2 men debate whether to unload sacks or pray harder. You choose the third option. Keep walking. Quirky tidbit. More than a few manuscripts traveled in book satchels, leather bags with flaps and long straps, designed so a single volume could be slung over a shoulder like a dignified messenger. A good satchel could turn a scholar into a one-man library. A bad strap could turn a scholar into a public spectacle when it snapped in the market square. You check the knot twice, because dignity is thin ice. At the first inn, you don't sleep. You sit near the hearth, chest between your boots, watching sparks spit like punctuation against the chimney's dark page. You doze and dream, the clasps are teeth, and the book is chewing modestly on time. Morning finds the straps soaked with the smell of smoke and stew. You wipe them with lard to keep the leather from cracking, and tell yourself that saints approve of practical greasing. When the road widens, you walk beside a pair of traders who speak in coin-weighted sentences. They carry bolts of cloth and 3 barrels of something they promise is wine. They eye your chest. Books? One asks, in the tone of a man who once read a price list and still hasn't recovered. You nod. He whistles. Heavy words, he says. You say nothing, mostly because you're counting the steps between puddles. A river crossing tests your faith in hydrology. The ferry is a raft with ambitions, its planks yawning like tired mouths. You keep the chest high as a wave slaps over the side and tries to negotiate directly with your ankles. A ferryman with arms like oaks says, happens as if that solves the problem of water. You step off, wetter, wiser, and very grateful for clasps. Historians still argue whether completed manuscripts often traveled far, or mostly circulated within regional networks, monasteries, swapping volumes, cathedral schools, commissioning near neighbors, dukes, sending writers only to trusted centers. Evidence shows both patterns. Some books barely crossed a valley, others wandered countries, their fly leaves blooming with ownership notes like passports stamped at every border. You stop at a shrine before a long stretch through the woods. You light a pinch of the chest's beeswax and press a soft seal on the wrapper ribbon. Not for security exactly, knives exist, but to feel that you did your part to ask the road to be kind. The wax cools into a thumbprint oval that looks enough like a saint's toenail to make you smile. Joke 1, small but steady. At noon, the sky forgets what color it meant to be and begins rehearsing rain. You pull a waxed linen cloth from the chest's false bottom and wrap the entire thing in one swift, practiced ballet. The first drop hits, beads, and slides away as cleanly as a well-made minim. You send a grateful thought to whichever binder invented practical paranoia. Inside the chest, though you haven't opened it too, imagine the book's spine flexing with each step, the choirs murmuring to one another in their gathering order, like pilgrims sharing bread. In your mind, you rehearse the opening page, the illuminator's lapis initial, the rabbit that peeks forever from behind a knight's shield, the tiny manicula that points, with endless patience, at a restored line you once scraped and rewrote. Travel turns memory into a reliquary. Night finds you at a guest house run by sisters. They set your chest on a dry bench by the stove and bring you ale broth that tastes better than dignity. One sister admits, over the rim of your bowl, that she has a chain library, a shelf of books, secured to iron rails, so readers can consult them freely without consulting their consciences. She smiles when you ask to see it, and you stand in a small room where spines glow like patient embers. Your book will likely know metal too. Chains are not prisons here, they are promises. You sleep beneath a blanket that smells faintly of lavender and starch, and dream your hands are clasps, and every page you touch stays straight. On the last day, the road tilts toward the city that commissioned your labor. Towers shoulder up from the haze. You feel the chest grow heavier with each gate you pass, as if it knows it is almost seen. In the chapter house, a clerk with ink on his sleeve unknots the straps, breaks your beeswax seal, and lifts the book like a baptism. He opens to the first folio. Lapis wakes. Gold blinks. The room tilts toward the light. The patron is not here. The book doesn't care. It has arrived where it was meant to be, redon, a lectern that smells of old wood and newer prayers. A chain rings softly as it finds its place. The clerk writes your master's name in a register, yours in smaller hand beneath it. He doesn't notice he's holding his breath. You do. Quirky epilogue. Some books traveled with curses written in their first leaves. May worms eat the thief. May his eyes forget sleep. May his coffee always be cold. Okay, not that one. Yet, you copy none of these. You simply lay your fingers on the boss of the top board and think a quieter hex. May you be read. The clerk closes the book. Clasps click. It is both ending and beginning, as all good closures are. You step back into the street. The road behind you is exactly as long as it needed to be. The road ahead already smells faintly of beeswax, rain, and something unwritten. Years peel away like dog-eared corners, and you're standing in a different quiet. Not stone walls and beeswax now, but climate control and low, bluish lamps. The room hums, an air system breathing with laboratory confidence. You sign your name in a log, wash your hands like a penitent surgeon, and accept a place at a broad table where book cradles wait like padded hammocks, cotton gloves. The conservator smiles and shakes her head. Clean, dry hands. Please, tactile feedback beats slippery fabric. The scriptorium's silence has been upgraded to firmware. They bring the volume out in a gray archival box that looks like it knows secrets and intends to keep them. You unclip the ribbons, unfold the flaps, and there it is. Wooden boards under leather, clasps like polite jaws. The spine with a faint heat-press title that still remembers the iron. You ease the book into the cradle and loop a pair of soft snakes snap/book. Snake shot-filled fabric waits over the top margins so gravity doesn't bully the binding. The clasps sigh open. Time turns a page. Under raking light, the parchment shimmers with its old anatomy, pores, faint fat marks, the soft nap raised where a knife once lifted a hair. Your eye finds the places your hand remembered, even if centuries stand between you. The manicula pointing at a restored line. The tiny caret where a word flew and came back obediently. The lifted blot that left only a whisper of roughness. If you tilt the page just so, you're not nostalgic, you're forensic. Paleography teaches you to date hands from letter forms to spot a Gothic A that leans, a long S that droops with regional accent. The choir signatures wink at you from the lower corners like mile markers on an ancient road you've walked before. Mainstream fact settles gently beside your elbow. This is how scholars read books as artifacts: codicology, structure. Choirs, sewing, boards, and paleography, the hands that built the letters. They note pricking and ruling patterns, count lines, sketch collation diagrams, map sewing stations, and chase later rebinding clues the way the old you once chased a fly out of ink. The archivist smiles as you measure a margin. We count the quiet, she says. The text is only half the text. You turn to the margins and they're still ridiculous, still perfect. Your rabbit knight peeks from behind a shield. A snail raises its spiral helmet for a duel. A hen with a halo studies a psalm as solemnly as any abbot. You feel a laugh rise and let it dissolve into a breath. Because the room is not for laughter but for listening with your eyes. The illuminator's lapis is a twilight that hasn't set. The gold leaf dapples candlelight that no longer burns. You whisper hello to the rabbit like you're passing an old neighbor on a quieter street. Quirky tidbit. Delivered in a hush. Someone in the 18th century pasted a recipe for black ink onto a blank flyleaf oak galls, vitriol, and a caution about not letting the mixture bite through. A practical ghost has joined the choir. Another page bears a faint fingerprint in brown where a scribe touched the margin with an iron gall thumb. The conservator jokes it's a 700-year-old two-factor authentication. Near the back, a tiny smudge blooms like a fossilized sneeze. You decide not to take it personally. The modern toolkit crowds around these medieval whispers. A conservator wheels over a camera that looks like a beetle and explains multispectral imaging. Ultraviolet to wake erased inks. Infrared to see through darkened varnish. Raking light to reveal surface surgery. The screen blooms with a ghost text beneath the Gospel of palimpsest size. An older homily. Scraped and overwritten when parchment ran thin. Historians still argue whether palimpsesting was thrift, censorship, or a pious recycling that treated words like souls transferred, not destroyed. The underletters glow, stubborn and soft, like embers that chose not to go out. Another colleague runs XRF X-ray fluorescence on a dot of blue, smaller than a breadcrumb. The graph spikes where lapis lives, confirming that the patron paid for Afghanistan in powder. Someone else mentions Zoom's peptide fingerprinting that tells you which animal gave its skin. Sheep in the outer choir, calf in the inner, evidence of a shop that mixed hides as budgets allowed. The data sounds clinical, but all you hear is a memory of scraping hair follicles and checking the grain with your fingertip while your breath-bait letters march. And the doodles. They're not shy about attracting theories. The snail duels have become a cottage industry of interpretation. Cowardice satire, moral allegory, visual pun, or just a long-running room joke that stuck because snails are inherently funny at 1 millimeter high. Historians still argue whether the armed rabbits invert power to mock earthly might. signal carnival misrule at the page edge, or simply made a weary illuminator snort into his sleeve. You offer a quiet fourth option, all of the above, depending on the day and the deadline. You flip to the colophon, the scribe's little window in the wall. A cramped hand complains of winter, cold. The candle stinks. My hand is numb. You remember the microscopic wool cap you once drew on a pointing hand. It's still there, ridiculous and tender. Across from it, a later reader has added a book curse, not original but heartfelt, a wish that thieves forget sleep. Effective, if not charitable. Joke 1 rises in your mind. Somewhere a medieval student stares at this line at 3 a.m. and decides the curse still works. The archivist brings out another volume to compare hands. This one is on paper. Watermarks dancing like ghosts when you backlight a page. Ox heads, towers, a tiny pair of shears. Your book resists comparison by being itself parchment with a memory of weather. You note how the parchments rivy the white pathways between columns of textura, still run like irrigation channels. Proof that breath once paced these lines. You can see the scribe's shoulders. A visiting scholar murmurs. You nod, because you can. A small pocket of disagreement forms at the table, politest tea, where certain marginal scenes coded commentary on local politics. Was that bishop with donkey ears actually a jab at a specific prelate, or a stock moral cartoon? Do the vines around initials function as mnemonics, guiding a reader through a text's architecture? Or are they pure ornament that later readers overread? Historians still argue whether a set of tidy rounded letter forms belongs to a woman's hand in a convent, or to a trained male scribe adopting a regional style. Paleography cannot sex a letter, and names hide more often than they reveal. You like the arguments. They keep the pages breathing. You ask, softly, about the paw prints, in a psalm a few folios ahead, perfect black cat feet stepping across a sanctified line. The conservator beams like a conspirator. Authentic accident, she says, our favorite genre. She points out the faint gray tide where someone once tried to wash the prints out. We leave them, she adds, they're the book's weather report. Joke 2 nudges at your ribs. The cat has finally been catalogued as a co-author. When the lights dim a notch to signal closing, you let the last page fall back against its brothers. The snakes are lifted, the clasps close, the box receives, the ribbons tie, the air unit thrums its careful lullaby. You write a few clean lines in the reading room log, a modern colophon, without complaint. Unless the HVAC made me chilly counts. The archivist slides the box onto a cart and says, see you tomorrow. You feel that in your wrists. Walking out, you pass a display case where a chain library ring gleams on a board edge, and smile at how steel once meant access, not prison. On another wall, a blown-up image of a palimpsest glows like a constellation. The caption reads, hidden text revealed. You think, not hidden, exactly, waiting, like a breath between lines. Outside, the evening is ordinary bus engines, a sandwich shop, someone laughing into a phone. You carry none of the book with you, and all of it. The margins have said their piece without raising their voice. The doodles didn't justify themselves. They never had to. They simply stayed. And tomorrow, when the box opens again, the rabbit will still be peeking, the snail still dueling, the pointing hand still pointing, and the lifted blot still fine as a healed scar. You've learned to read what the margins say, and what they let you guess. Joke 3. Small and sufficient. You whisper goodnight to a drawing, and a guard outside the gallery nods back, as if he's heard the same thing before. The scriptorium exhales. One candle gutters, then another, and the room dims to a dusky amber that makes the gold leaf on distant initials wink like sleepy eyes. Benches empty in a shuffle of robes, and careful elbows. Quills are rinsed and laid to rest like thin-boned birds. Knives slip into sheaths with the soft click of day's end. You stay, not as a rebel, just as a witness. Pages cool more slowly when someone watches. You draw your palms over the worktop to brush away the last freckles of pumice. The board is warm where your wrists lived all afternoon, a map of invisible oceans. The master has already banked the brazier, and the inkpot wears a cloth cap against night dust. Iron gall will deepen while you sleep. That's its nature, pale gray, widening into brown. Then black, as if the sentence wakes after you. Mainstream fact taps your shoulder. Iron gall ink chemically binds into parchment and darkens over days. Its bite made lasting books, but, in excess, could corrode paper in later centuries. You've seen blades of letters go brittle in younger books. You hope your own lines age like oak, not like smoke. At the far desk, the illuminator finishes a last pinprick constellation in the blue of an initial 3 white stars. Then he lowers his brush and closes his shell palette with a clamshell sigh. Enough, he says to the room, or to himself. You nod to the rabbit knight peering from the shield on folio 23. He seems satisfied with how today turned out. You promise the snail he can stop dueling when the bell rings for Copland joke 1. He ignores you, because snails are notoriously stubborn. You make your rounds like a keeper of quiet animals. The manicula that points at your restored line. Still pointing, loyal as a finger puppet. The caret you stitched above a skipped word. Neat as a seam you'd let anyone inspect. The lifted blot from last week. Perfectly healed, only a faint roughness if you ask the page a certain question with a certain angle of light. The mistakes you fixed have turned into small rooms where patients slept. A faint scuffle at the door, of course. The cat arrives as if paid to do a last inspection. She pads along the benches, inhales the ghost of vermilion, jumps into the master's chair, and blinks at you like a foreman. You scratch the air beside her ear, because you're not risking fur on a fresh folio, and promote her silently to head of quality assurance. Quirky tidbit slips from memory to margin. Old libraries sometimes welcomed book scorpions, pseudo-scorpions that lived in bindings and ate booklets, little guardians with pincers and no sting. Somewhere, one is patrolling your choir right now, a librarian measured in millimeters. The room's last noises fade, a cooling pop from the brazier, a wick's soft whimper, stones settling into night. Your shoulders drop. You feel the habit of breath you learned here. Inhale for minims, exhale for curva, still pacing your chest. You've copied scripture. Saints lives, a bestiary with a beaver, who makes questionable medical decisions. A charter that could buy a village twice. And a patron's family tree whose branches argued with you from noon until sext. You have filed a day into a book, and the book into a century. You trace the choir signatures at the foot of the last gathering, little letters and numbers. A breadcrumb trail you leave for the binder, and any future repairer who needs to take the whole apart without losing its soul. On the inside margin, you make a tiny pencil mark where a sewing station should go. No ink. Just the faintest graphite whisper to a hand you will never meet. Here, you tell them, is where we hold it together. The master returns, moving with the careful weight of someone who can tell if a book is dry just by listening to it. He tests the clasp on a finished volume. Click, click, and looks at your bench. Close it, he says, kind without softening. You wipe your nib, seat your knife, and draw the coverboard over your day. Clasps settle with that polite jaw sound. A book likes boundaries, so do hands. You let yourself think the big thought only when the room is almost dark. The press will come, Gutenberg and all his brisk mechanical confidants, and it will change this slow thunder of letters. Mainstream fact again. After the mid-15th century, Printing spread, hand copying in monastic scriptoria dwindled, but rubricators and illuminators kept busy adorning early printed books. Hand and press sharing custody of the page. Historians still argue whether the shift felt like liberation or loss to the people at benches like this, whether scribes moved to proofing and rubrication with relief or grief, whether the margins grew quieter or simply learned new jokes in movable type. You suspect it was everything at once, because change is a choir, not a solo. You write a small colophon for today, in the extra scrap you keep under the board. Frost outside. Ink behaved. Cat rained. Amen. You smile at your own economy and decide not to sneak it onto a leaf. The book has enough voices already. Joke 2. You briefly consider illuminating your to-do list with gold, then spend 30 comfortable seconds not doing that. You pinch the last wick and watch smoke braid upward like a vine. The air cools a degree. Your fingers uncurled from the monk's claw belong to a person again. You slide the day's choir into a board press with 3 others. Wood and weight and the slow physics of flatness. Tomorrow, the illuminator will bring the dawn back in lapis. The day after, the binder will braid linen through the fold, and the book will learn to open and close like a living thing. You stand, and the room stands with you, the benches aligned. The windows small as penholds, the floor scuffed in a map of patience. You bow, not to the altar already done, but to the quiet craft that taught your breath to draw straight lines. Joke 3, whispered toward the door. Good night, rabbit, call off the snail at none. Against all reason, you think he nods. You pull the door, and the corridor's chill kisses your face. Ink under your nails, wax in your sleeve, a quill in your belt out of habit, souvenirs that won't trouble customs. Behind you, the last candle becomes smell only. Ahead, the long sleep you've earned, and the book that will outlast it. Now, as the hallway cools and the stone breathes slowly, you let the day loosen its grip. The heavy door rests against its frame, and whatever light remains becomes a faint, warm haze in your memory. The benches are empty, the pages are quiet, and the gold rests its tiny suns. You feel your shoulders lower, one notch and then another, as a gentle, almost weightless silence settles in. You picture the book lying safe between boards, its clasps gently holding, its leaves lying calm and flat. The rabbit in the margin has tucked himself behind the shield. The snail has stopped mid-charge, as if frozen by a kind thought. The manicula points at nothing urgent, knowingly at the open space where a breath can be. Your own breathing follows. In, soft and easy, out, longer, slower, like a line that knows how to end. The walls keep the night. The floor remembers the warmth of feet. And in that held stillness, every sound becomes kind. A distant bell finishing its circle. A cloth settling on wood. A wick forgetting to smoke. If a thought arrives, it can sit in the margin. It does not have to join the line. It can be a small vine, a leaf, a tiny creature sleeping with its tail around its paws. You give the thought a quiet place, and turn the page gently, from one calm moment to the next. The air grows cooler, the edges softer. Ink becomes whisper, parchment becomes cloud, and you without effort are carried by an old reliable rhythm. The body's own rubric, the heart's slow illumination. You are safe, and the story has put away its tools. The book will be here in the morning. For now, the candle is only a memory of light. Close your eyes. Let the room fade. Let the last bright speck of gold become a small, friendly star that knows your name and watches over your sleep.